The American Civil War was one of the most defining events in U.S. history, shaping the nation's future in ways that still resonate today. While most people know the basics, battles, generals, and the fight over slavery, there are countless lesser-known facts that reveal just how complex and surprising this era truly was. From bizarre battlefield encounters to hidden stories of heroism, these details will change the way you see the war. If you love uncovering the untold history of the Old West and beyond, make sure to subscribe to our channel. There's always more to the past than meets the eye. Hot air, hideaway. Throughout the Civil War, both Union and Confederate forces turned to hot air balloons as an innovative way to gather intelligence and observe enemy movements. These aerial tools allowed them to gain a broader perspective on the battlefield, offering a significant strategic advantage. The Union primarily relied on two balloons for this purpose, the Intrepid and the Union, not the most creative name, admittedly. The Confederacy, on the other hand, had a single balloon that proved to be quite useful, the Gazelle. These balloons were typically launched to altitudes of up to 1,000 feet. From that height, observers could scan the terrain ahead, identifying troop formations, fortifications, and movements. Their role was to provide real-time updates that helped commanders make more informed decisions. Without modern aerial surveillance technology, these balloons were among the most advanced reconnaissance tools available at the time. One major challenge was communication. Unlike today, there were no radios to transmit findings instantly. To work around this, balloon operators used two primary methods to share information. In some cases, they sent messages down via telegraph cables connected to the ground. More commonly, they relied on a system of signal flags to indicate enemy positions, troop numbers, and suggested movements. This method allowed them to send crucial details without drawing too much attention. Although these balloons were far from modern aircraft or stealth technology, they were groundbreaking for their era. They provided a unique vantage point that helped shape battlefield tactics, proving that even in the 19th century, military innovation was constantly evolving. The worst day ever. In September 1862, Confederate General Robert E. Lee led his Army of Northern Virginia across the Potomac River, marking his first official campaign into Union territory. This bold move was not just about geography, it was a calculated effort to shift the momentum of the war. Lee aimed to bring the fight away from the battle-scarred South and onto Northern soil, forcing Union forces to defend their homeland rather than advancing further into Confederate states. More strategically, he hoped to lure the Union Army away from its well-fortified positions around Washington, D.C., and engage them in open terrain where he believed his men could achieve a decisive victory. As Lee pushed northward, fear and uncertainty spread throughout Maryland and southern Pennsylvania. Civilians had little information about his exact intentions, but the mere presence of Confederate troops so close to major cities like Baltimore and Philadelphia caused widespread concern. Local militias and military defenses were put on high alert. Union officials worried that if Lee's advance went unchecked, he could threaten key industrial centers and possibly even attempt a strike on the nation's capital. In response, Union General George B. McClellan mobilized the Army of the Potomac, moving his forces out from their defensive positions around Washington. His goal was twofold: to protect both the capital and the surrounding northern cities, while also maneuvering to intercept Lee's advancing army. McClellan's forces spread across Maryland, carefully positioning themselves to anticipate Lee's next move. Over the following weeks, a series of key engagements unfolded, including battles at South Mountain and Harper's Ferry. These clashes were significant in their own right, but they were only precursors to what would become one of the most pivotal confrontations of the Civil War. On September 17, 1862, the two armies met near Antietam Creek in western Maryland. What followed became known as the Battle of Antietam, an engagement that would hold a lasting place in American history. Both sides entered the battle with nearly full-strength forces, and the scale of the conflict was unlike anything seen before in the war. By the end of the day, the staggering number of casualties underscored the intense nature of the fight. Antietam remains the single deadliest day in American military history, a somber reminder of the immense costs that came with the war. Beyond the immediate impact on the battlefield, Antietam had far-reaching consequences. Though tactically inconclusive, it provided President Abraham Lincoln with the opportunity he had been waiting for to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. This move shifted the focus of the war from solely preserving the Union to a broader fight against slavery, altering both domestic and international perceptions of the conflict. In many ways, Antietam was not just a battle. It was a turning point that reshaped the course of the Civil War and the nation's future. Ironclad innovation. On March 8th and 9th, 1862, the Union's USS Monitor and the Confederacy's CSS Virginia, often mistakenly called the Merrimac, engaged in a historic naval confrontation. The battle took place in the waters of Hampton Roads, Virginia, near the entrance to the strategically vital James River. Over the course of nearly 2 days, the two ships exchanged fire in an effort to secure control of the harbor and the surrounding waterways. Despite the intense engagement, neither side emerged as a clear victor. Both ships sustained damage and eventually withdrew, leaving the outcome inconclusive. Yet despite the lack of a decisive winner, this encounter, now known as the Battle of Hampton Roads, became one of the most significant moments in naval history. The reason for its lasting importance lies in the ships themselves. The Monitor and the Virginia were both ironclad warships, representing a dramatic shift in maritime technology. This battle marked the first time in history that two ironclads faced off against each other in combat. Their ability to withstand cannon fire demonstrated that wooden naval vessels were becoming obsolete. The confrontation signaled a turning point in shipbuilding and military strategy. From that moment on, ironclad ships became the foundation for naval fleets around the world. While no definitive victory was claimed at Hampton Roads, the battle reshaped the future of naval warfare and ushered in a new era of armored vessels on the seas. New Mexico's Civil War history. When you think of the Civil War, which states immediately come to mind? Most people recall Virginia, where the war ended at Appomattox Courthouse. Pennsylvania's Gettysburg is another major landmark, as is Antietam in Maryland, known for its significant impact on the war's course. Enthusiasts of Civil War history may think of South Carolina's Fort Sumter, where the first shots were fired, or Mississippi's Vicksburg, a pivotal point in securing control of the Mississippi River. But how often do people consider New Mexico? It may not be the first place that comes to mind, yet its role in the conflict was crucial. On March the 26th, 1862, an often overlooked battle unfolded in the New Mexico Territory. While it remains one of the lesser-known conflicts, its outcome had significant consequences for both Union and Confederate ambitions. Known as the Battle of Glorieta Pass, this confrontation was so pivotal that historians have come to refer to it as the Gettysburg of the West. This title underscores its importance, as it marked a turning point in the Confederacy's attempts to expand westward and secure valuable resources. The Confederacy had long set its sights on expanding its influence beyond the southeastern states. Texas, already part of the Confederacy, served as a launching point for campaigns into the western territories. Confederate leaders sought to take control of New Mexico as a stepping stone toward even larger ambitions. Their ultimate objective was to reach Colorado, where they hoped to seize gold mines that would provide critical financial support for their war effort. From there, they planned to move further west, capturing key strategic locations in what is now California. If successful, they could establish Confederate control over important ports in Los Angeles and San Diego, securing access to Pacific trade routes and expanding their economic power. By early 1862, Confederate forces had gained ground in the Southwest, including in parts of present-day Arizona and New Mexico. They launched a campaign northward from Albuquerque, hoping to establish a stronger foothold in the region. A portion of these forces moved along the Santa Fe Trail toward Glorieta Pass, a crucial route through the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Their plan was to push through the pass and continue into Colorado's gold country. However, Union forces had anticipated the movement and were positioned to intercept them. What followed at Glorieta Pass was a decisive engagement that changed the trajectory of Confederate ambitions in the West. Union troops successfully blocked the Confederates' advance, disrupting their supply lines and halting their expansion. Without access to the resources they had hoped to secure, the Confederate leadership was forced to reconsider their strategy. The dream of extending Confederate influence into Colorado and California was ultimately abandoned. Had the Confederacy been successful in securing these Western territories, the course of the war, and even the future of the United States, might have been drastically different. Control over the Pacific coast could have altered international relations, trade routes, and the balance of power in the war. Instead, the Union's victory at Glorieta Pass ensured that the Western territories remained under federal control, preventing the Confederacy from gaining the additional resources and strategic advantages they desperately needed. Though not as widely remembered as battles in the Eastern Theater, Glorieta Pass played a vital role in shaping the Civil War's outcome. It was a conflict fought not just over land, but over the vision of what the future of the continent would be. In that sense, its significance extends far beyond the hills of New Mexico, influencing the very fabric of American history. Cold, hard cash. The first time the United States government issued paper currency on a national scale was during the Civil War. These new banknotes, known as greenbacks due to their distinctive green ink, were introduced as a way to help fund the Union's growing financial demands. The war was proving to be extremely costly, and relying solely on gold and silver was no longer a viable option. By circulating paper money, the federal government aimed to stabilize the economy and ensure that trade and daily transactions could continue despite the turmoil of the period. However, the term greenback was originally used in a somewhat dismissive way. When the Treasury first released the notes in the early 1860s, many Northerners were hesitant to accept them. Unlike traditional currency, these bills were not backed by gold or silver, leading to widespread skepticism about their actual value. People feared that if the war went poorly or the economy faltered, the greenbacks might become worthless. Adding to this uncertainty, banks were reluctant to exchange greenbacks at their full face value. Since the paper money was not tied to a tangible reserve of precious metals, financial institutions often offered less in return when customers tried to deposit or redeem them. This reluctance further fueled doubts about the new currency and made it difficult for the public to fully trust its use. Despite these initial challenges, greenbacks played a crucial role in shaping the future of American finance. Over time, as the Union government stood behind the notes and successfully managed war expenditures, confidence in paper money grew. The introduction of greenbacks marked a turning point, paving the way for the modern banking system and the use of federally issued paper currency. What once seemed like an uncertain experiment ultimately became a foundational element of the U.S. economy. History of submarines. During the Civil War, underwater combat technology was still in its infancy. No military in the world had yet developed a fully functional and effective submarine capable of engaging enemy ships. However, that began to change by 1864, when the Confederacy introduced the H.L. Hunley, a pioneering vessel that would go on to make maritime history. This small, hand-cranked submarine became the first in recorded history to successfully engage and sink an enemy warship. On the night of February 17, 1864, the H.L. Hunley was deployed off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. Its target was the USS Housatonic, a Union warship stationed as part of the naval blockade designed to cut off Confederate supply lines. The Hunley, operating beneath the surface, maneuvered into position and attached an explosive device to the hull of the Housatonic. Shortly after detonation, the Union ship was severely damaged and sank in the waters of Charleston Harbor. This marked a significant milestone in naval warfare, proving for the first time that a submarine could be used as an offensive weapon in combat. However, the success of the Hunley did not come easily. The vessel had experienced significant setbacks before achieving its historic mission. Constructed in Mobile, Alabama, the submarine was transported to Charleston in 1863, where it underwent testing and early deployment attempts. The Confederate Navy hoped that this experimental vessel could help break the Union's blockade, which had been severely limiting Southern trade and supplies. But before it could carry out a successful attack, the Hunley suffered multiple setbacks. On two separate occasions, it ran aground on the floor of Charleston Harbor, requiring extensive recovery efforts and repairs. These mishaps delayed its use and highlighted the challenges of early submarine technology. Even after its successful attack on the Housatonic, the Hunley did not return to port as expected. Mysteriously, it never resurfaced, vanishing with its entire crew. The exact cause of its disappearance remained unknown for well over a century. Theories range from accidental flooding to shock waves from the explosive device damaging the submarine itself. The wreckage of the Hunley was finally discovered in 1995, buried under sediment off the South Carolina coast. After its recovery in 2000, researchers studied the vessel and its remains, providing new insights into the risks and difficulties faced by those who operated this early form of underwater warfare. While the Hunley's mission ended in tragedy, its impact on military strategy was undeniable. Its success demonstrated the potential of submarines as offensive weapons, paving the way for future naval advancements. In later conflicts, nations around the world would develop far more sophisticated submarines, building on the groundbreaking but perilous work of the H.L. Hunley and its crew. Today, the recovered vessel is displayed in Charleston, serving as both a historical artifact and a reminder of the innovative yet dangerous experiments that shaped modern naval combat. Stamp. During the Civil War, inflation became a major economic crisis, particularly in the Confederate States. The Southern government, desperate to fund its war effort, resorted to printing vast amounts of paper currency. However, this flood of newly issued money quickly outpaced the supply of goods and services, leading to severe devaluation. Compounding the problem, wartime blockades and disruptions in trade severely strained supply lines, making everyday necessities scarce. As a result, the cost of living soared, and many Southerners found themselves struggling to afford basic commodities. With the value of Confederate money diminishing rapidly, faith in the currency plummeted. While the North also experienced inflation, the issue was far more extreme in the South, where prices reached astonishing levels. By 1864, for instance, the cost of flour in Richmond had skyrocketed from a pre-war price of a few dollars per barrel to over $250. Other essentials, such as meat, coffee, and clothing, became prohibitively expensive. In some places, the Confederate dollar was worth just a fraction of its former value, and by the end of the war, it was practically worthless. Amid this economic turmoil, people sought alternative ways to conduct transactions. Gold and silver, long trusted as stable forms of money, became highly sought after. Many citizens hoarded precious metal coins, fearing that paper currency would soon become completely useless. Some even resorted to burying their wealth in glass jars to protect it from potential confiscation or theft. However, since gold and silver were in limited supply, another unexpected substitute emerged: postage stamps. Stamps held an advantage because they were issued at a fixed price and could be exchanged for postal services, making them a reliable medium of exchange. Small businesses throughout the South quickly recognized their potential and began using them as a substitute for traditional coins. Shopkeepers started giving stamps as change, and customers accepted them because they retained a set, tangible value. Before long, many communities were informally using postage stamps as a form of everyday currency. The widespread use of stamps in commerce highlighted just how severe inflation had become. Even the federal government took notice. Horace Greeley, a prominent newspaper publisher and political figure, proposed an official government-backed postage currency to stabilize the economy. Recognizing the necessity of such a measure, the U.S. government acted on his idea. On July 17, 1862, Congress approved the issuance of fractional currency, often referred to as postage currency. These were small paper notes featuring images of actual postage stamps, with their total value matching the denominations printed on them. While they were not an ideal solution, they provided much-needed stability in a time of financial uncertainty. For a period, many Americans, North and South alike, relied on these stamp-backed notes for everyday transactions, demonstrating the lengths to which people would go to adapt in times of crisis. The Civil War not only reshaped the political landscape of the United States, but also led to innovative, if temporary, financial solutions. Though inflation in the South ultimately contributed to the Confederacy's downfall, this unusual chapter in financial history serves as a reminder of how necessity can drive unexpected adaptations in commerce. The Great Locomotive Chase. On April 12, 1862, an extraordinary event unfolded between Atlanta, Georgia, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, one that would later be known as the Great Locomotive Chase. In a bold and carefully planned operation, a group of Union soldiers and Southern Unionists seized a locomotive with the goal of disrupting Confederate supply lines and communications. Their plan was ambitious. Using the train, they would sabotage rail infrastructure, destroy bridges, and cut telegraph wires along a critical stretch of track. If successful, this mission could cripple the Confederate Army's ability to transport troops and supplies in the region. The train in question, a Western and Atlantic Railroad locomotive named the General, had been making its routine journey north when the raiders took control at Big Shanty, now Kennesaw, Georgia. Their leader, a civilian scout named James J. Andrews, directed them to work quickly, damaging tracks and disabling telegraph lines to prevent Confederate forces from relaying news of the theft. For a time, their plan worked seamlessly, and the Confederacy found itself at a sudden and unexpected disadvantage. However, the operation did not go unnoticed. Confederate forces at nearby stations soon realized what was happening and sprang into action. At first, lacking an available locomotive, they pursued the stolen train on foot. Recognizing that running could not keep pace with a steam engine, they improvised, first securing handcars and later managing to take control of a locomotive of their own. As a result, a dramatic high-speed pursuit unfolded across the Southern Railway. The chase continued for hours, pushing both sides to their limits. The Union raiders worked frantically to damage the tracks behind them, hoping to slow their pursuers. The Confederates, meanwhile, were relentless, repairing what they could and pressing forward with determination. The pursuit was a testament to the vital role that railroads played in Civil War strategy. More than just a means of transportation, they were lifelines for moving troops, food, and war materials. Ultimately, the Northern Raiders encountered an insurmountable obstacle. Their locomotive, the General, ran out of fuel just south of Chattanooga, leaving them stranded. With no choice but to flee, the men scattered into the surrounding countryside, attempting to evade capture. While some managed to slip away, Andrews and several of his men were eventually apprehended by Confederate forces. The consequences were severe for those caught, as the Confederacy viewed their actions as an act of espionage. Andrews, along with 7 of his fellow raiders, faced harsh punishment. Despite their capture, their daring mission had a lasting impact. The raid highlighted the strategic importance of railroads in the war and forced the Confederacy to increase security along its railway network. Wait, the youngest soldier known to have served during the American Civil War was Johnny Clem, a 9-year-old boy from Newark, Ohio. Born in August of 1851, Johnny's early life was marked by hardship. In May 1861, just months after the tragic death of his mother in a train accident, he ran away from home, determined to contribute to the Union cause. His ambition to fight for the North led him to attempt to enlist in the Union Army, but his young age and small stature were major obstacles. His first attempt was to join the 3rd Ohio Infantry. However, the recruiters rejected him due to his size and youth, which seemed incompatible with the rigors of military life. Undeterred, Johnny didn't give up. He then tried to enlist in the 22nd Michigan Infantry, only to face the same rejection. But rather than return home, he chose to follow the regiment, refusing to let his dream slip away. After some time, the soldiers of the 22nd Michigan Infantry began to accept Johnny's persistence. Rather than turn him away, The officers and men of the regiment allowed him to stay with them. While the unit didn't want him to fight, they recognized his value as a morale booster and unofficial mascot. Johnny became known for his lively spirit, and he took on the role of drummer boy, a vital position in military units during the war, responsible for relaying commands and keeping time for marching soldiers. His presence quickly endeared him to the troops, and they took on a protective and supportive attitude toward him. Johnny's contributions were not just symbolic. He was paid a soldier's wage of $13 a month, a gesture from the officers who collectively decided to include him as part of the official ranks, even though he wasn't technically enlisted. His story is a testament to the camaraderie and the sometimes unconventional roles played by soldiers during the Civil War. By 1863, just before his 12th birthday, Johnny was officially enlisted in the Union Army. Although still very young, he had managed to carve out a place for himself in the history of the war. Over the years, Johnny's role evolved as the war raged on. His youthful determination and sense of duty made him a memorable figure among his fellow soldiers. Johnny Clem went on to live a long and full life. His service didn't end with the Civil War. He later served in the Spanish-American War in the late 19th century. His legacy as the youngest soldier of the Civil War remained a significant part of American history. Johnny Clem passed away in 1937 at the age of 85 in San Antonio, Texas, leaving behind a story of youthful resolve, persistence, and service during one of the most tumultuous periods in U.S. history. Did you make that at home? The iconic image of Civil War soldiers in their respective uniforms, Confederates in gray and Union soldiers in blue, is something many of us recall from history classes. This simple distinction is often presented as a straightforward way to tell the two sides apart. However, like many aspects of the war, the reality of military uniforms was far more complex and varied than this basic summary suggests. At the onset of the Civil War, both the Union and Confederacy aimed to issue standard uniforms to their soldiers. The Union, with its greater financial and industrial resources, was in a better position to provide uniforms, but even they faced difficulties. Early on, soldiers on both sides received semi-standardized uniforms in their respective colors, gray for the Confederates and blue for the Union. However, as the war progressed and resources dwindled, the initial supply of uniforms quickly ran out. The economic strain of the war meant that soldiers could no longer rely on the government for new clothing. As a result, many soldiers, particularly in the Confederacy, had to either make their own uniforms or rely on clothing suppliers from their home regions. Southern soldiers, in particular, faced significant challenges when it came to their uniforms. With the Confederacy's limited resources, soldiers often found themselves with little more than a basic jacket and trousers, typically made from a durable wool-and-cotton blend. The lack of consistency in the fabric and dye used for Confederate uniforms meant soldiers often wore shades of gray, brown, and even tan, creating a mismatched and haphazard appearance. This led Union soldiers to call their counterparts butternuts, a reference to the dull, yellowish color of the Confederate uniforms. The scarcity of resources also meant that many Confederate soldiers were forced to make do with the same pair of shoes for months or even years, as getting replacements during the war was nearly impossible. In contrast, Union soldiers had a more reliable supply chain to meet their uniform needs. The Norse greater industrial capacity allowed for the mass production of uniforms, ensuring that Union soldiers looked more uniform and consistent than their Southern counterparts. Additionally, the Union's strong international connections, particularly with European nations, allowed them to import textiles and other materials necessary for outfitting their soldiers. As a result, Union soldiers generally had more access to well-made, standardized uniforms throughout the war. The Union's distinctive blue uniforms remained largely unchanged throughout the conflict. While the color of their trousers shifted to a lighter shade of blue in 1862, the dark blue woolen jackets, or blouses, remained a constant feature of their attire. Unlike their Confederate counterparts, Union soldiers did not have to rely on homemade clothing, which gave them a distinct advantage in terms of uniformity and quality. In essence, the story of Civil War uniforms is a tale of two very different military experiences. The Union's advantage in terms of resources allowed for a more consistent and professional appearance, while Confederate soldiers, often under-equipped and resource-strapped, had to make do with whatever they could scrounge together. This disparity in uniform quality reflected the broader differences between the two sides during the war, with the Norse industrial might providing it with a crucial logistical advantage. The American Civil War was a complex and multifaceted conflict, and these lesser-known facts shed new light on the history that shaped our nation. Understanding these details helps us appreciate the sacrifices made during this tumultuous time and the lasting impact on both the Old West and modern America. If you enjoyed exploring these hidden aspects of the Civil War, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating insights into the Old West in American history. Join us as we continue to uncover the stories you may have never heard.